Good morning. Welcome to our online event, Parkinson's Disease and Lewy Body Dementia Caregivers. Today's program is brought to you by Parkinson's Community Los Angeles. We're so fortunate to have with us Dr. Jory Fleischer. I'm Judy Yaris. I serve on the PCLA board as Vice President. For those of you who don't know us, we are a nonprofit and we support families living with Parkinson's through free education programs like this one, online and in-person support groups, social events, and so much more. If you appreciate our work, please consider making a donation to PCLA.org. Your donation is 100% tax deductible, so thank you in advance. We always rely on your generosity to help us continue this very important work. Our presenter today is Dr. Jory Fleischer. She is a fellowship-trained movement disorders neurologist with a special interest in understanding the needs of individuals and families who are living with advanced Parkinson's disease and related disorders. She also has a special interest in designing new models of care to better serve this population. After 3 years on the faculty at New York University, she joined the Rush University Medical Center Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders program in 2017. There she sees patients and conducts research. Dr. Fleischer is supported by the National Institutes of Health and various nonprofit foundations and has several research studies underway that are focused on interdisciplinary home visits and caregiver peer mentoring to improve the lives of patients and families who are living with these conditions. So now please welcome Dr. Jory Fleischer.
Thank you so much, Judy, and huge thank you to everyone who is tuning in live and to folks who are watching this after the fact. It is such an honor to speak with you, and just know that from all of us who are not in LA, we have been thinking of you from all across the country and hoping that people are rebuilding and healing. So just thank you for taking this time. So it is such a pleasure to speak with you. This is a topic that is quite near and dear to my heart in many ways. We're going to talk today about Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia caregivers, unique challenges that are faced by this population, and more importantly, what can we do? So I have tried my hand at lab and bench research. I am not the person for pipettes and finding the latest medication or protein. I don't have that kind of delayed gratification when it comes to my patients and families. So there are brilliant minds, thousands of researchers, so that people know, who are working on the pipeline of treatments for the future generations. I see it as my responsibility to say, okay, that's wonderful. And what about the people who are living with us now? So I hope that this resonates and you take something away. So with that, here is the horizon for this talk. We're going to talk about what is Lewy body dementia and why are we talking about Lewy body dementia in a Parkinson's group. What does that have to do with anything? And then what do we know about Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia caregivers? And I will use the term caregivers, care partners, carers interchangeably. I know that for some people really identify with caregivers. Other people really do not identify with caregivers. So I hear you, and I have found that no matter which term I try to use consistently, someone is unhappy with it. So I know, please don't come at me. I will use all of the terms as much as I can. And then beyond what we know about our care partners, in addition to having very strong and very important opinions, what can we do to support them? And what can we do to support those they love? And how are those related? So I mentioned, why are we talking about Lewy body dementia in a Parkinson's setting? What even is this? And I will tell you, this is something that on a daily basis confuses my colleagues, confuses neurologists, confuses patients and families every single day. And it's terrible naming. And so let me frame it this way. So the term Lewy body dementia is really an umbrella term, and it covers two different things, or we think about them as being different, but maybe they're actually on a spectrum that we would call synucleinopathies. So two brain pathologies where this protein alpha-synuclein goes wrong. And so this is dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's disease dementia. And there are ongoing arguments about the semantics of lumping these conditions together or separating these diagnoses. And it becomes a bit of a which came first, the chicken and the egg. And so that is how I think about this. Okay. This is a chicken and egg problem under a lovely umbrella. All right. So bear with me. I will explain what I mean by that. There is this arbitrary rule. I did not come up with it, where if a person develops Parkinsonism, by which we mean slowness of movement, stiffness, maybe they have a tremor, maybe they have trouble with walking, freezing of gait, sort of those movement symptoms that as a movement disorders neurologist, I am trained to look for, right? So the Parkinsonism, the movement stuff, here we're going to think of that as the chicken. The chicken comes first. We diagnose that person with Parkinson's disease. And if 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, that person then goes on to develop cognitive changes. And they're very specific cognitive changes. So this is different than Alzheimer's. This is changes with attention and concentration, changes with decision making. Someone who used to be able to multitask really well now just cannot. If they're interrupted in the middle of something, they cannot get back on track to where they were. This is someone who, was an accountant and now struggles to make change or calculate a tip. Visuospatial changes. So that person who always had a great sense of direction and now is getting turned around on familiar streets, or, just driving to the store, but they come back 2 hours later and can't quite tell you what took so long, right? Setting things not quite in the right cabinet, unloading the dishwasher and putting the spoons where the towels are. Not someplace totally crazy, but someplace that's just a little bit off. So visuospatial changes, attention, concentration, and decision making. If those changes happen 5, 10, 15 plus years after the movement changes, then we say that that person has Parkinson's disease dementia, or PDD. However, there are people who did not read that book, because there are individuals who develop those same dementia symptoms first, and either sometime later on or within the same year or so that the cognitive symptoms start, that person also starts to show signs of Parkinsonism. So the movement stuff comes around the same time as the cognitive things. And so if that dementia egg comes before the chicken, or the dementia egg comes alongside the Parkinson's chicken, they both arrive in the same basket, we say this person has dementia with Lewy bodies. And it gets even more confusing because here's our chicken sitting on an egg, but this pink umbrella is Lewy body dementia, which means regardless of which order you got there, if the chicken and the egg are present, we say a person has Lewy body dementia. So I have probably sufficiently confused everyone, but that is where this naming is. And I see a lot of families that will come to me often and say, my loved one, I was told that they've had Parkinson's forever and ever, and now someone just changed the diagnosis, and now she has Lewy body dementia. And that is an understandable shift in perspective. And I think, sometimes it's some of that reassurance to say it's not a wrong diagnosis. Parkinson's wasn't wrong. This is part of it, right? This is sort of like thinking about you have Parkinson's and Parkinson's related constipation. You have Parkinson's and the orthostatic hypotension. It's part of it. Not everyone gets every symptom, right? It's kind of like the Cheesecake Factory menu. You can't possibly order every single thing, but it's part of what's on offer. It's what's all included in there. Okay, so for folks who are unfamiliar with that dementia, with these cognitive changes, I just want to go into this just a little bit more so we're sort of on the same page of what are individuals with these diagnoses and what our care partners are up against. So to say someone has dementia with Lewy bodies, so egg and then chicken, right? The cognitive changes have to meet criteria to say dementia, which means, yes, they're there, but they're there to a sufficient degree and they're progressing over time that they are interfering with a person's normal social activities or work, their occupational functions, or their usual daily activities. So you can't have dementia with Lewy bodies without meeting criteria for dementia. We can have cognitive changes and worry that someone is on that path. But you also must have at least two of these core clinical features. So, one of the hallmarks that we see, in addition to those areas of memory and thinking that are affected, are these cognitive fluctuations. And this is different than the motor fluctuations that we often talk about in Parkinson's disease. So, cognitive fluctuations, if you picture a dimmer switch on a wall, we've all probably been in a room where someone is, in the middle of a talk or something, and someone accidentally knocks the light, the dimmer switch, and the lights just go off, right? Think about alertness and arousal levels in a person's brain as almost being on that dimmer switch. And dementia with Lewy bodies leads to someone kind of accidentally nudging that dimmer switch so that people's cognitive levels fluctuate. They might be able to have a really spot on conversation about their job, about their family, about, what they just saw in the news yesterday with, really insightful comments. And 5 minutes later, care partners will often discuss, like they almost can see sort of the clouds descend. They see a fogginess. The person is really struggling to find their words, really struggling to kind of make logical sense of what they're saying. And it's unpredictable. And there's nothing you can do to snap them out of it. You just kind of got to wait it out. I think about this like when a plane is taking off, you go through a cloud layer. And unless you're the pilot, if we're the passengers, we don't necessarily know when that's going to clear. We just know we're eventually going to get through it, right? We just got to wait it out. So those cognitive fluctuations are very common and critical. And then people can also have recurrent visual hallucinations. So they're seeing the same thing over and over. And there's some kind of trends, themes that happen in those. People also commonly will have REM sleep behavior disorder. And if this sounds familiar, this is because this is also part of Parkinson's disease, which is that acting out of dreams during sleep. And you'll see Parkinsonism is listed here as a core clinical feature. And I just said people have to have the cognitive changes to have dementia with Lewy bodies, and only two of the core clinical features. So someone should be looking at this and going, so are you telling me you can have the chicken and the egg even if you don't have the egg or the chicken? Yes, which makes this all the more confusing. So there are people with dementia with Lewy bodies who don't have signs of Parkinsonism, but I often think of that as don't have signs of Parkinsonism yet and likely to develop it, which means there are a lot of folks with these symptoms who are often misdiagnosed. So we think actually probably 50% of people who are out there with Lewy bodies in their brain are walking around undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, thinking that they've been told that they have Alzheimer's, but actually that's not quite where their symptoms fit. So that can be immensely stressful for individuals living with it and for care partners who might go to an Alzheimer's support group and go, wait a minute, why do I feel different? My loved one doesn't have these things and they have other things, no one's talking about it. Okay. So skip over this as I sort of talked about those clinical features, but I do just want to touch on the hallucinations. If this is something that you've encountered, that can be really concerning. If this is something that you haven't encountered, either as a person with PD or as a care partner to someone, this can be something that we really are very scared of. And I want to put sort of out just the PSA of most often hallucinations do not just come out of nowhere. There's really nothing in Parkinson's that should be, I woke up one morning and something was so different. Okay. These are slowly progressive conditions. So if you or your loved one wakes up one morning and there are hallucinations where there never were before, or walking is completely different, really different than it was the day before, always, always, always think about something else going on underneath. Most of the time, it's a urinary tract infection. Okay. So even though it feels completely bonkers for me to tell you, if your loved one is having hallucinations, check their urine. I promise you, 90+% of the time, it is a urinary tract infection, and other infections and problems with the person's system are going to show up through their Parkinson's symptoms. And once we treat those other things, that will get better. But when we think about hallucinations gradually evolving over time, they can often start as just what we call a presence hallucination. So this vague sense that someone is there. The person's not necessarily seeing someone, but they just think someone else is in the room or think someone else is in the neighboring room. That can evolve to seeing the same thing kind of over and over. Maybe they see bug on the floor. They might see some lint on the table, or they're picking at sort of invisible schmutz on their clothes or picking at fuzz that you can't see. They may be seeing a mouse in the corner or a bird on the windowsill, things that could very well be happening. So often we wonder whether people are having sort of these very mild hallucinations and not even mentioning it to anyone because there could be kids playing out on the front lawn, right? And then they kind of blink and the kids are gone. And maybe that doesn't rise to the level of going, hey, did you see that? But as time goes on, these hallucinations can evolve. They can get more involved. They can get more frightening. People can start to see groups of people or have worries that there are, people in the house and they're doing things and nefarious ideas. So we want to be aware that this can happen and let the treating doc know because there are things we can do. So I bring that up because for the last however many years of Parkinson's, 218 plus years that we've discussed this condition, we've sort of recognized some inevitable triggers for hospitalization and death. These are the things when people ask me in clinic, well, what do people with Parkinson's die from? What do people with dementia with Lewy bodies die from? These are the leading causes of hospitalization and death. Falls, urinary incontinence, usually urinary infections that lead to, they sort of go untouched and can spread to the blood and become very serious infections. Dehydration, metabolic changes, sodium levels, calcium, potassium levels getting wonky. Neuropsychiatric issues like hallucinations, delusions, agitation, really bad depression or anxiety, or just profound confusion, but also caregiver strain. So there are multiple studies that have said, okay, pound for pound, even if we compare people with Parkinson's who have the same duration of illness, the same severity of illness, they're different. Not everyone gets hospitalized at the same rate. Not everyone gets placed in a nursing facility at the same rate. What are other contributors? And even if we account for all of those other things, two identical people with Parkinson's, not that there ever are such things, but if there were two identical people with Parkinson's, but who had different care partners, the care partner who is really feeling like I am just on the edge, I am on the brink, I cannot do this any longer. That care partner's loved one is far more likely to wind up in a nursing facility or in a hospital than someone whose care partner feels like this is hard, but I can manage and I know where to go for help. The other challenge with hospitalizations is probably many people on the call have experienced this is once people with Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia are hospitalized, the hospital stays are longer, they have more complications, and they're more likely to be discharged to a nursing facility instead of being discharged home, which for most people is exactly the opposite of what they want. So here is the not rocket science hypothesis, is that many of these things are preventable or manageable at home if we could pick up on them early. Like I said, if we could pick up on that urinary tract infection on day one, when it's showing up as walking is a little bit off compared to usual, or we're having hallucinations that are different than usual, instead of picking up on the urinary tract infection when someone already has a raging fever and is really confused, we might be able to do better. But doing so requires an educated, engaged, observant, and empowered care partner. So, what do we know about care partners in Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's disease? And if you have not seen the movie Encanto, I cannot recommend it enough. My 7-year-old daughter would happily give it her, 5-star recommendation. But I feel like our Parkinson's care partners and Lewy body care partners have big Louisa energy. They are the big sister, the older sibling who is sort of carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders and going, no, it's okay, I got this. So here's what we know. 83% of community dwelling people with Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia rely on unpaid caregiving from family members. That is over 18.5 billion with a B hours of care every year. And if we actually paid people for the time that they spent, that would be over $232 billion per year. Even in the early years of Parkinson's, care partners have a nearly twofold loss of direct income compared to people who are not caring for a loved one. Why? Well, I got to take, half a day off of work to go get my loved one to the doctor. We need to go to PT. We need to do this. We need to, get the insurance stuff filled out. All of these things, it does add up. People have looked at this. It matters. And we also know, well, okay, caregiving is hard. Why should Parkinson's caregiving or Lewy body caregiving be different necessarily from any other caregiving, right? And I hope in your mind you are screaming at me and going, but it is. Of course it is. That's why we're here, right? And there's research to prove it. So Parkinson's and Lewy body caregivers have higher levels of caregiver strain and burden and higher levels of depression, even compared with similarly aged caregivers to a loved one with Alzheimer's or related dementias. And I am very, very fortunate that among my research team that I get to work with, I have a cohort of Parkinson's and Lewy body care partners who work with me, who help write papers with me, who tell me, Jory, you're doing it wrong. You need to think about it this way. And we submitted a paper talking about the differences. And there's always a reviewer too. When you submit a paper to a journal, they send it around to a couple of other scientists, and usually there's one who comes back and has very lovely constructive feedback, and there's someone who read it at 2 a.m. and they're angry and they're unhappy and they don't like anything about it. And they said, what is the biological reason that Lewy body and Parkinson's care partners should be any different than Alzheimer's? Basically, these are all not great conditions. No one would want these, and they should all be the same. And my care partners, who I have the pleasure of working with and researching with, had words for reviewer two. Those words only had 4 letters, but basically they said, how could you possibly think this is the same? Because we are dealing with motor symptoms, movement symptoms, which fluctuate based on time of day and based on meals and based on medications. And we just talked about the cognitive fluctuations, which are separate. So we might be moving really well, but cognitively we might be in a slump. And we've got neuropsychiatric symptoms. My loved one might be hallucinating today, whereas yesterday they were fine. We've got non-motor things. How do I know when my loved one is finally going to have a bowel movement and where the nearest bathroom is going to be? And will I make it there in time? And we are trying to predict and plan around this in the midst of all these fluctuations. Of course, it's different. And the majority of individuals, at least in studies, who are caring for a loved one often are women caring for a male person with Parkinson's or Lewy body, and our women are helping with transfers and lifting and schlepping and moving. And so, not surprisingly, there is a lot of physical strain. And they said, basically, reviewer two said, well, I'd really like to see you prove it. And so our care partners looked at me and they went, Jory, let's do a study. Let's do a survey and ask people and we'll prove it. So this doesn't prove it, but this gives us a little bit of information. So this is a very ugly table. But what I want you to take from this is we did a survey. It was just a one-time survey as people were going into another study that I'll talk about, but 182 family care partners who are actively caring for a loved one with Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia. And we used a validated survey that people can just say, have you ever been diagnosed with any of these problems? Are you being treated for any of these problems? Are these problems severe enough that they're impacting your life? So very common things, high blood pressure, depression, back pain, etc. And what you can see is the light gray column over here towards the left. This is the number out of 182. So 70 out of our 182 people reported that, yes, they have high blood pressure to some degree, and that's about 38.5%. But if we go across, we divided up our 182 into their age groups. And any box that's a dark gray means compared to people of that age group, the rate of this symptom is statistically higher than it should be for age. So it means that our Lewy body and Parkinson's care partners have higher rates of high blood pressure, even as they approach older ages. We know that high blood pressure increases, but this is out of proportion to that. We know that depression is common, but the rates of depression are out of proportion to that. Similarly with back pain. Same with sort of other medical problems, the potpourri, but all kinds of these different issues. So I've mentioned that caregiver strain independently increases a person's risk of hospitalization. It also independently increases the risk of that individual with Parkinson's or Lewy body being placed into a nursing home. And unfortunately, when we started this work, there were no effective interventions that had been shown to actually be helpful for care partners of a loved one with Parkinson's or Lewy body. And we looked and we were like, well, what's out there at all that helps care partners? And really, the only things that have been shown to be helpful and that actually help beyond sort of the first couple of weeks that you're in it are very, very costly multimodal approaches, meaning you go through a lot of training as a care partner, you take time off and you go to like care partner boot camp, and then a nurse calls you multiple times a week and checks in and sets you up the visits and all these things, which may work well for some people, but maybe just simply too much for a lot of people to be able to do. They're too busy caregiving to do these caregiving interventions, and there isn't funding to sustain these. And so, as a clinician, I see patients in clinic every week, and I have families that come to me and go, like, Tori, that's like, I can't. I have reached my limit. Can I talk to your social worker? Can she send someone? She can send a caregiver to the home, right? And I have to break hearts on a daily basis and say, unfortunately, no, Medicare does not pay for caregiving. Even Medicaid, in most cases, does not pay for caregiving. Hospice does not pay for caregiving. Our system is broken. And so most paid caregiving is paid out of pocket by families, and it is extremely expensive. Sometimes I give support group talks, and I'm talking to rural Iowa, and that $30 an hour, I see people sort of their eyes bug out of their head. Talking to you in LA, $30 an hour for caregiving is probably an underestimate, right? This really varies significantly, but it is extremely expensive. Caregivers are in high demand and low supply, which was true before COVID, has worsened post COVID. There is a really high turnover rate, there's a really high burnout rate. Um, I expect that that will worsen because we know that a lot of the paid caregiving workforce are women, minority women, underrepresented minority women, sometimes undocumented. And so we know that this is an intersectional group that is really feeling pressed, especially right now. And so this may worsen as time goes on. And so they also, even if you find someone and they're wonderful and they stick with you and you can afford it, they don't know anything about Parkinson's, most likely, or dementia, or end of life care if that's something that we need. And so this is not a sustainable option for most. And I worry that Judy is like, oh my God, I invited this person on and she's like all doom and gloom. I promise that is not what I'm leaving you with. But this is the situation that we have, right? And so
No
the
worries.
challenge is if the cavalry isn't coming, right? Then what do we do? So what can we do? So here is where I started, or part of where I started, which is when I was on faculty in New York. I had the amazing opportunity that we had some philanthropic funding, and my division chief said, "You're interested in sort of warm fuzziness and research. You really like people who are sort of more advanced in terms of their Parkinson's." I had this idea. I pitched it to a philanthropic donor, which was we lose patients in advanced stages of Parkinson's, Lewy body, and related disorders. We start seeing that people are missing their appointments. And this was before the age of telemedicine, but they're missing appointments. They're in the hospital. We have a phone call, no one returns it. We don't know what's going on. We are missing our patients, and we are very attached to our patients. Could we make it out to them? Right. And so there's been sort of a, everything that's old is new again. Um, People doing home visits, which has largely been in the VA. They really have been a leader in home visits for primary care, and in some areas of the country. And so we had this idea, what if we just tried to prove that this was doable? And essentially, this came from me talking with colleagues and saying, listen, I went through a movement disorders fellowship. I finished neurology residency. I did 2 years of training to, hang my shingle as a Parkinson's expert. And I'm not seeing patients at more advanced stages. How am I supposed to, in good conscience, say that I'm a Parkinson's expert if I don't know what's going on at those advanced stages? And I actually had colleagues say to me, well, Jory, if they're that advanced that they can't come to us, like they can't be getting that much worse. And, we've done everything we can do. And frankly, that's not okay with my soul. It's part of why I went into neurology is I have family members, not with Parkinson's, but family members in the past who had been told that in the 60s and left as, we can diagnose you, but there's nothing we can do. And that is just simply not true in Parkinson's anymore, thank God. And so we said, what if we just go to them? What if we cross, instead of the blood-brain barrier, what if we cross the office-home barrier? And so we went as a trio of social worker, nurse, movement disorders neurologist. And I will tell you very honestly, my role is the least important. Okay, so I did everything that if you've been to a movement disorders neurologist, we tap and we clap and we watch people walk. That's the stuff I did, whether it's in the clinic or whether it's in the home, that's what we do. What is key here and what really informed work going forward was our social worker would pull the patient aside or the care partner aside, if there was one, and say, what services are you getting? What services do you feel like you need? What are the unmet needs here? Who is supporting you, person with Parkinson's? Who is supporting you, care partner? Do you have what you need? Do you identify as part of a spiritual community? And have you been totally disconnected from them? Can we get you reconnected if that's something that's important to you? Have you thought about goals of care? What's the plan? Is there a crisis plan in case something happens, either to the person with Parkinson's or their care partner? Right? What happens if someone trips and falls? Then what? Right? What do we do? And can we plan ahead for that? And at the same time, our nurse was taking blood pressure, checking for orthostatic hypotension, drops in blood pressure, but saying, no, for real, can I see how you're doing your meds? Not just, are you taking them the same as you were at our last visit? Yes, doc. Yes, I am. And we check a box and we go, whoa, my patient is 100% adherent. No, take me to the system. And in some homes, that system was a beautifully organized, the tackle box with, 6 times a day, and it's set out and everything is beautiful. And I will tell you that more often than not, it was not that. More often than not, it was a giant gallon Ziploc bag into which all of the medications had been dumped. Or it was a system of paper plates with different bottles, some expired, some duplicate, some ended, some, that we have allergies to, all strewn on the same table or counter. And a person is navigating that on their own. We also had our nurse or social worker with permission walk around the person's home and look for safety concerns, areas where the person could fall, areas where it looked like maybe there had been a fire on the stove or something was burnt in the microwave, metal was microwaved or something like that. And identifying potential areas where sort of low-hanging fruit, where can we get in there and actually make a difference? And so here's what we found. Over the course of about 3.5 years, we did over 400 home visits. All 5 boroughs of New York City, which is quite a large area. And not all of our patients had a care partner. So about 13% of people who met criteria as being homebound, 13% were completely alone. And our women were more likely to be alone than our men, which is a whole other issue. But among those who had a care partner who was with them, and a care partner who was with them across multiple visits, who answered questions for us for more than a year, what we found was that caregiver strain was really high among these caregivers. And so we did this study. But what was interesting is in every other study of Parkinson's, as time progresses, as the disease goes on, function worsens and quality of life follows right alongside there. But what we found, interestingly, was that among our folks who were receiving home visits, their Parkinson's was getting worse, but their quality of life stayed the same. It was really the first time that those two curves actually separated. And so I had colleagues and reviewer twos who came back and said, well, Jory, maybe it's just because these folks are so poorly, they're doing so poorly, their quality of life can't get worse. So I'll get back to that in a second. But what we found was among those individuals who had a care partner and the care partner was there and answering questions for us over the course of a year, caregiver strain worsened. And so what we knew was home visits maybe were helping our patients, but they weren't going to be sufficient alone to mitigate caregiver strain. So then the idea came, what else can we do? What can we nestle in with home visits that could help? And this idea of how do we connect care partners together one on one? And would that ease the journey in isolation? So, this idea of peer mentoring came about. And when we started looking at this in 2014, 2016, around that time, this was sort of in its infancy. And the idea had been studied in Alzheimer's, where they paired former care partners with current care partners. And it was kind of done loosely. There were different areas, and they were like, all right, well, are you up for talking to someone? Great. All right, you talk with this person. They didn't necessarily match them up. They didn't necessarily have a curriculum or sort of vet people. They just said, you're willing to talk with someone, we can give out your phone number. Fantastic. What they found was when they tried to look at this and do research and sort of measure the outcomes, that the quantitative, the numeric results were not all that compelling. But the qualitative data, what people said about what it meant to connect with someone who gets it, was unbelievable. And that has since translated into peer mentoring programs across so many different areas that have not only shown that qualitative data, this is meaningful and this helps me, but have shown improvements in other outcomes that we can measure to show to that angry, crotchety reviewer too and go, no, really, we've got the data to prove it. And I put, some of the areas where this has been shown to be helpful. I think to me, to anyone who questions peer mentoring, and we've certainly had people go, well, you're not going to get care partners who want to do this. You're certainly not going to get past care partners who are willing to put themselves back in this situation. It's too triggering. And that may be true for some people. But I want to draw your attention to the last bullet point on this list. They have shown, and I cannot imagine a group of people who have more reason to run screaming in the opposite direction of re-engaging than bereaved parents who have lost a child to cancer. And even in this situation, people have found that these parents who have lost their child will willingly volunteer to mentor other parents who are actively going through this process and serve as a mentor to them, right? And if that population is willing to do this and is finding benefit as mentors, let alone the mentees, then this seems really powerful. So we decided that we would build on the home visit intervention to better support our caregivers. I moved to Chicago and got funding from the National Institute of Health with a Career Development Award to study this idea of home visits plus. And so we recruited 65 patient caregiver pairs who would receive 4 visits over the course of 1 year. Same idea as in New York. The same stuff was happening, but we were ahead of the curve. We were introducing telemedicine. So my nurse went out to the home, a research coordinator went out to the home, brought an iPad, brought a Wi-Fi hotspot so we didn't have to worry about anyone remembering their Wi-Fi password. We set it up, we brought the internet with us, and I was here in my office on my own iPad. And so I could tap and clap and see what was going on, but my nurse could gather the information. My social worker was there gathering the information. And then we came together as patient, care partner, multiple care partners, doctor, social worker, nurse, and said, okay, here's what we got. We might have uncovered a whole lot of things. What's going to be our top priority? We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And leaving people with bullet point, very simple language. Here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to fix, and here's what's going to come next. So we did these visits and we published this data. And again, we knew that this wouldn't be enough for our care partners. So we took this idea of peer mentoring and we said, let's just try it. And so we recruited 34 peer mentors, and these were largely past care partners who had lost their loved ones to Parkinson's or related disorder. So we had some peer mentors whose loved ones had progressive supranuclear palsy or multiple system atrophy, sort of the atypical Parkinsonisms. And we brought them on site to Rush, and we did 6 hours of training to sort of set everyone's expectations. Maybe your loved one never had hallucinations, but let us give you kind of a primer so that you get it if your mentee brings that up. And we created this very short, about 40-page handbook that we thought, well, if this is helpful, use it. If not, don't use it. Really simple things, what to do in case of emergency, couple of, navigating difficult symptoms. And we gave this to people. And we just asked them between home visit 2 and 3, talk with your mentor. We'll connect you. We just want you to talk for the 16 weeks. We would love for you to talk once a week, but let us know. Tell us how often you spoke with each other. Tell us how long you spoke. We did not tell them how long to speak. Far be it from me to add more time to a care partner's 24/7 regimen. So, and we asked them to track it. And so here is what we found, that it was feasible. They actually did it. Satisfaction was quite high. So in this first study, our very first rollout, where peer mentoring was nested within home visits, on average, our pairs had 11 calls over 16 weeks. They talked for 30 minutes a week, and satisfaction was 91 out of 100. And when we looked broadly over the course of 1 year of home visits plus peer mentoring, caregiver strain was higher in our home visit caregivers than in our control group, which we knew because our control group was not the same. Our control group was drawn from a Parkinson's registry, and the patients are far younger, healthier, not homebound. So it's comparing apples to oranges, but those care partners have increased caregiver strain over 1 year. It's what we see in every other study. But here, caregiver strain did not change once we had home visits plus the peer mentoring. So we thought maybe we're onto something. And so we started to pull this out and say, we wonder if this could be a standalone intervention. We're working on how we translate the home visits and make that sustainable. But in the meantime, what if we tried to figure this out? And so when you're coming up with a grant, you need a very catchy acronym. And this was very relevant to me because I was partially raised by my maternal grandparents who raised their other daughter, my mom's sister, who has severe neurologic disease since childhood. So she's nonverbal. She's been in a wheelchair. I thought everyone had an aunt who was nonverbal in a wheelchair till I was probably far too old and should have realized that earlier. But I spent a lot of time with them. And my grandmother, I vividly remember teaching me the word persevere and perseverance when I was 4. And the dictionary definition of persevere is to continue in a course of action, even in the face of difficulty or with little or no prospect of success. And when you write a grant, especially for the NIH, they really like if you have a catchy acronym. And sometimes you need to stretch to make it. But if you underline certain letters, peer, mentor, support, and caregiver education, you get to persevere. And so we titled the next study, Learning to Persevere. Why Lewy body dementia? Why not Parkinson's? Because the home visits were just in Parkinson's. So here's a bit of inside baseball. Several years ago, there was funding and legislation passed by the government to create this national plan to end Alzheimer's. That led to a lot of funding within the National Institutes of Health for research on topics in Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's disease related disorders. And I already told you about all the confusion with LBD. So some person lumped Lewy body dementia under the Alzheimer's disease and related disorders umbrella, which means if you are proposing to do a study and you have it LBD facing, you have a far better chance of being funded. And if it's the exact same study, but it's just Parkinson's, Parkinson's alone doesn't fall under that big lump of funding. And so we said, well, let's just increase our chances of making sure and knowing that the symptoms are all the same, chicken, egg, chicken. Let's make this for Lewy body dementia and see if this works. And so what we did was first we held focus groups of people who'd been mentors in that first study, people who'd been mentees in that first study, and then de novos, care partners who hadn't been part of the peer mentoring. And we shared this idea with them. We shared that 40-page handbook with them and said, too much, too little? What else should we add? Is this helpful? Should we even give you a curriculum? What do you think? And we got so much feedback. And we made this entirely virtual. We opened up recruitment. We partnered with the Lewy Body Dementia Association and the Parkinson's Foundation, and they shared information about that pilot study, Learning to Persevere, through their different listservs and Facebook groups. And we recruited and trained 36 new peer mentors from all across the United States. What did training look like? So it was still about 6 hours of training on Zoom. We covered key topics, so it was sort of that primer and symptoms, but also active listening. What do you do if your mentee calls you and something's going on? They're feeling depressed. Someone expresses suicidal thinking. Their loved one has gone missing. They just got back from the grocery store and they call you and say, he's not here. What do you do then? Right? And trying to make sure that people knew we've got you. You call the study team, you call 911, but let us give you some pointers. And we had question and answer sessions with some of those folks who'd been mentors the first time around. And we knew that we wanted to make sure that our mentors felt supported when they were mentoring. So we offered monthly conferences, different times of day that they could join so that they could share their experiences, their successes, and challenges. And even though I mentioned earlier that in other peer mentoring programs, data was published that said it doesn't really matter who you match with who. If people have been through this journey, they've been through this journey, it's better than nothing. We don't think it makes a difference. Match them up however you want. We thought maybe we could do better. And so we asked people in learning to persevere, we said, of these different things, having the same gender identity, this around the same age, racial or ethnic background, sharing the same role, spousal care partner, partner care partner versus an adult child versus a sibling or a neighbor, right? How important are each of those things in a match if we were able to match you up? And while we are not Tinder, we did the very best that we could. We put everyone's preferences on index cards and we tried to match people up. And we were actually able to match up 29 of our 30 mentees on their top priorities. That one that we couldn't match was an early Lewy body care partner who was also actively caregiving for young children and wanted someone in that same boat at the same time. So that person was very hard to match, but everyone else we were able to match. And what they told us was, this book is a nice start. We need more. We need more. We want you to tell us if conversation is difficult. How do we get the conversation started? Give us conversation starters for each week. And don't just tell us what we need to know about symptoms. Tell us what we know about care partners so that we're not alone. Because what I hear in clinic all the time is people expressing guilt that they feel, expressing anger, and thinking that it's just them. It's not just them. It's never just them. It's never just you. This is part of this process. So normalizing that and bringing that into the light was really, really critical. So we put all of this information together and we went from a 40-page pamphlet to a almost 400-page book that we created that was loaded also with what else is already out there online. Let's put that in as appendices. So about 130 pages of new content. And the rest of it was, let's print out good stuff that's trustworthy, not Uncle Google, that we can include in this book. So if you want to learn more, you can flip to the back of the book and learn about it. So this is what that looks like. It was filled with quotations from Parkinson's and Lewy body care partners who had been through the program. We put in questions and prompts and things to think about. We put in those resources. We gave people the links, but then at the back of the booklet, they could flip through and get to that. So we asked people to talk with each other weekly for 16 weeks, using this book to the extent that it was useful. If they came upon a topic that week and it just felt irrelevant, skip it. No one's going to be in the same place. It's just there as a scaffold. And what we found was, despite active caregiving demands or bereavement in many cases, our care partners prioritized learning to persevere. So 30 for 30 pairs finished the intervention. They called each other over 420 times. It averaged out this time even better to 15 calls per dyad, and they spoke for 45 minutes a week. Some spoke for 2 hours a week. Again, we didn't tell people how long to talk. We asked them, was it useful? Would you recommend this? And that was 100% across the board. I'm going to skip down and show you this first before I come back up to that, because I think that's the takeaway. But we had previously developed actually a knowledge test to assess people's understanding of Parkinson's and Lewy body. And we found not only did our mentees, who are earlier in the course of their loved one's journey, improve their knowledge about Lewy body and improve their attitudes and their confidence and their skills of caring for a person with dementia, but our mentors did too, which we did not expect. We really thought that, they're already experts. They're not going to have anything further to learn from us. And indeed, they did. And I think some of it, maybe they learned from the book, but some of it, they learned from their mentees. Because as much as this is structured sort of like a mentor-mentee hierarchy, it absolutely was not. And what we found at the end, we also asked people, our mentors, we said, we know that this was a lot. Would you do this again? 90% said yes. We asked our mentees, we know that you are in the midst of it, and this is a lot. Would you, if given the option, go for a second round? go back as a mentee, do this again, be mentored by someone else? 40% said yes. 10% said, I'm good. Don't want any further participation. I'm okay right now where I am. But 50% of the mentees said, I would like to become a mentor. I would like to pay this forward to those who are following behind me. And so when we know that the cavalry isn't coming yet, we need to look and say, all right, I wish it was coming from our healthcare system. But until then, the cavalry is around us. The cavalry is us. We just need to recognize the wisdom and the lived experience that is there among our care partners and be willing to share that. And so the human connection, again, the qualitative data from this was overwhelming. So we have, quotations from our mentors and from our mentees. Someone saying, I wish I'd been given the handbook the moment my mother was diagnosed. It would have saved a lot of worry, tears, and frustration. But for the mentors, they said, the training, the handbook, being a part of something outside my four walls, gaining a friend, realizing I actually have something to contribute to others and have acquired some skills, affirmation, being able to honestly and confidentially share my heart. We just said, were there any benefits to participation? That was the prompt for that one, right? And so this is what we found. We also asked for more feedback. We did more focus groups and people gave us more feedback and said, include even more. But also, you could bench press this 400-pound book, make it a PDF. I want to be able to search it and carry it in my pocket. But also, it would be great if it was a website. And make this 12 weeks instead of 16. Compress it a little bit because we had mentors who were going on vacation across international boundaries, and we're still trying to find ways to talk with their mentee. So we wanted to make this as easy as possible, but still as rich as possible for people. And so we put that together. We applied a lot of what's called community-based participatory research. So all along the way, bringing in care partners and going, what else? What now? What can we do better? How can we make this richer? So we had been studying the impact of virtual reality technology to increase empathy and understanding of Parkinson's and Lewy body in home health professionals with this company that developed a virtual reality, and you kind of embody a person with Lewy body. So you put on the headset, or now you watch it online, and the person stretches their hands out and their hand is shaking, or they're interacting with their family members, but there are little hallucinations happening at the same time. And it's quite disorienting. And we showed this to focus groups of care partners and we said, what do you think? Too much? Too triggering? Is this helpful? And they said, oh my gosh, is this what my loved one actually sees? I had no idea. I can read about it and I can go on the websites and I can hear this, but to have some view as to what this might look like for them, you need to put this in. So we incorporated that. We built the website. We turned it into the PDF. We updated all the links and made sure that everything we'd had before was still actively working. And we applied for funding. And even though the NIH has not historically funded a lot of Lewy body work, has not historically funded a lot of caregiver interventions, they funded this one, which is still remarkable. And it's year 2, and I still pinch myself every day. But we learned, and now we persevere. And so we have a national randomized controlled trial of peer mentor support and caregiver education with this hypothesis that we're asking, can a Lewy body specific, Parkinson specific, care partner centered educational intervention improve caregiver knowledge, confidence, strain, and caregiver health outcomes? And does it improve the outcomes of the people living with Lewy body too? So I won't go through this giant conceptual framework and all of the psychological and behavioral theory that goes into it, but trust me, it's there. Count. We're running short on time, so I will just leave with these last few things. So the study is open enrolling. We are open to all 50 states and U.S. territories. So if you know Parkinson's care partners in Puerto Rico or Guam or the Virgin Islands, please let them know we have resources. We are set up to help them as well. Our folks can become peer mentors if they have been caring for their loved one and the loved one has had cognitive changes for 3 years or more, or the loved one has passed. Otherwise, people are in the larger group of care partners and are randomly assigned to either sort of the more active intervention or the lighter intervention. But I will say this is not a true control group. Our lighter intervention gets 12 weeks of education and resources sent to them. So even if you're in the non-peer mentor group, I promise we have still designed stuff for you. It is about 9 months of being involved in the study. 12 months of active stuff, and then 6 months of follow-up where we just text you every 2 weeks and say, could you just let us know how stuff is going? And I'll skip over this. The way, if people are interested, this is the link. We have a study website. You can go here, the QR code, I'll show again. You can zap that if that's helpful. It will take you to a little screening survey. You have to tell us that you're not a robot because we had a lot of bots and spammers trying to join the study. So we had to put that in there. Sorry, because it's annoying. And then you'll see a video about the study and information, and then you complete stuff all that way. So here's where we are so far. We've had over 1,400 people click through to the survey, 739 complete the survey, and we actually had to expand enrollment for peer mentors. We hit our goal of 120 peer mentors, but they are not very diverse at this point in time. And so we're trying to make sure that our peer mentors reflect the care partners that are out there. And so we are still enrolling if folks are in some of these underrepresented groups. But we are definitely enrolling for folks whose loved ones are in those first 3 years of symptoms. So our target is 502 care partners, and we are aiming to get there by October. So please, if you know anyone, please send them our way, share information. We are looking, we know that within Parkinson's and Lewy body, we tend to see a lot of female care partners, a lot of white care partners, a lot of folks in metropolitan and suburban areas, not a lot of rural dwelling or male or care partners of color. So we are trying to make sure that we have representation. California has shown up strong. So look at that. We were at 44. I think that was last Monday. We probably have more people already, but we are open to everyone. So that's where we are. We've been hearing about people. People have been hearing about us from all of these different organizations that we've partnered with. So thank you. I have a PCLA logo on here. Thank you. Thank you. We will be on TikTok very soon, offering life hacks and education and little bits and pieces because our care partners told us to do that. I feel too young to retire and too old for TikTok, but they told me we need to do it, so we're doing it. And so to conclude, Lewy body dementia is a very confusing concept, but it is common. It is a growing cause of dementia and disability worldwide. And as one of my mentors has said, it's probably the biggest disease you've never heard of. And yet in the Parkinson's world, we're sort of there and sometimes don't quite recognize it. There are identifiable and potentially preventable or manageable causes of hospitalization, but doing that requires trained and empowered caregivers. And we know that our caregivers have higher strain and burden than those for people with Alzheimer's disease, which is its own risk factor for our loved ones, but is potentially modifiable through peer mentor-led educational interventions. And despite the fact that we know our care partners are under high strain and burden, they are our heroes. They will willingly share invaluable lived experience and train as mentors to newer caregivers who then improve their own knowledge and attitudes and create this pipeline for the future. So with that, I will happily share slides, send those out to Judy. I just want to
Yes.
acknowledge all of the folks who've been part of this. Thank you so, so much. Those are my grandparents. And I mentioned they taught me to persevere. I got into neurology not having any movement disorders in my family, but a lot of other neurologic disease. And lo and behold, during the pandemic, both of my maternal grandparents developed Parkinson's and dementia with Lewy bodies, respectively. And so if I didn't already think the world of our family care partners before, um, you know, I certainly do now. So thank you, thank you.
This was amazing, absolutely amazing. I would like to just, if you could stay on for 5 minutes,
Of
could we
course.
please just take, we can't do more than that, but I'm happy to take a few questions. Dr. Fleischer can take them. Um, it's so amazing, and we as an organization, PCLA, will definitely try to get people out there for you. I can think of a few caregivers that come to mind right now that I think would be amazing mentors. And I could certainly think of plenty that could use a mentor, mentees that could use a mentor to come in. Excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you
Do
so
we have a
much.
question that somebody did ask about how many different kinds of dementia are there? Is that something that can be
Oh,
answered?
Barbara, that is a great question. I don't think that there's an easy answer to that. There are many kinds of dementia. I think that this is really a huge challenge, and there's a lot of misconception around that. It's sort of like how many kinds of headache are there, right? A lot of us will think, if you have migraines, you kind of think, well, that is headache, right? But there are lots of different headaches besides migraine out there. Commonly, when people hear the word dementia, they think Alzheimer's, or even if they don't know that that's what they're thinking, they're sort of picturing a person forgetting who the folks are around them, asking the same questions over and over. And that's not this. That's not what this is. So we know there's sort of Lewy body dementia is this one kind that kind of encompasses dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's. Alzheimer's is most common, but then this is second. There's a dementia from having kind of tiny or larger strokes kind of adding up over time, what's called vascular dementia. There's frontotemporal dementia, which is where people have really pronounced sort of personality behavioral changes. Not that we can't see behavioral changes in Lewy body, but different. And then there are a whole host of others. So there really are, um, you know, I would say dozens of different kinds. There's sort of the, you know, three or four big ones: Alzheimer's, Lewy body, vascular dementia, multiple forms. The more we learn, the more people participate. One of the most unbelievable selfless things is, people will go to brain donation. Um, and the more we study folks' brains, we see it's not that someone has only Alzheimer's or only dementia with Lewy bodies. They presented in life with all of the symptoms of one, but their brain actually may show signs of multiple different pathologies. And so there's a lot of research right now going into why is that? Why is that? And what does that mean? And what do we do with that? How do we prevent that? Is there a uniform pathway that, like, if one thing is going on, it sets off a domino effect and you can get multiple? And how do we stop it? Does that mean a treatment for one thing would also work for the other? So there's a lot going on.
Thank you so much. This was so informative and so wonderful. And I'm sure everyone here really enjoyed it. And thank you all for hanging in there with us. I just wanted to let you know that April is Parkinson's Awareness Month. So, April 2nd, PCLA is launching a new in person series. If you're in the LA area, it's called PCLA's Lunch and Learn. And our first guest speaker will be neuropsychologist Dr. Doe Gold. On April 5th, you can join us at the DNJ Gallery for the opening of Spontaneous Activity, an art exhibition that will run for 12 weeks featuring the works of Parkinson's artists. And there'll be several interactive activities that will be taking place at the gallery that are going to be PCLA directed in May. And lastly, join us on April 27th at the Hollywood Improv for Laughing Matters, a comedy fundraiser for PCLA with Arsenio Hall and many other great comedians. So if you enjoyed today's program, please visit PCLA and make your donation today. By donating to PCLA, you can join us in our mission to improve the lives of families in our community living with Parkinson's disease. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Fleischer, again, thank you. This was incredible. Take care, everyone. Have a great day and stay dry.